always the same, in disarray. At first light, I must focus on the 5 W's before tossing the covers. The who, where, what, when, why, and how of life.
That was a clip from A Place Called Pluto, a documentary directed by Steve James, which offers a glimpse into the life of Greg O'Brien. Greg, an award-winning investigative reporter, he grew up in Rye in Westchester, New York, and has an impressive 40-year career as reporter, editor, publisher, author, film producer, and writer. And 5 years ago, at the age of only 59, Greg was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease. In his new memoir, On Pluto, Inside the Mind of Alzheimer's, Greg gives an illuminating and honest account of living with the disease, and he hopes to inspire others. We spoke with Greg, who told us what it's like to lose your mind and to witness pieces of your very own identity slipping away, and he talked about the demons that he battles every day. Greg, thanks a lot for the time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Rich. Appreciate it.
One of the things you lay out so well in this book that people can check out on Amazon on Pluto is you just lay it out there. And you don't try and sugarcoat Alzheimer's. And at least for me, who thought I was pretty well read on it, the numbers are staggering. Before we get into your story, talk about the national story, the pace, the rapidity that this illness is impacting so many families. And if you project it out not too far from now, how this is the #1 growing disease, arguably, in America.
These are the doctors, Harvard, Stanford, they, by their estimation, Alzheimer's, without a cure, will wipe out the baby boom generation. And nobody sees it coming other than the select few who are impacted by it. And just by way of background, my maternal grandfather died of Alzheimer's. My mother, Virginia Brown, born and raised in Rye, where I was raised, died of Alzheimer's in a bruising, knockdown, prize fight of a battle with this demon of a disease. And I watched them both in a front row seat several years ago. In my late 50s, I'm 64 now, I started experiencing the symptoms, horrific symptoms, short-term memory loss, not recognizing familiar people, not knowing where I was in familiar places, seeing things that weren't there. The impolite word is hallucination. Incredible rage, depression, and then I had a serious head injury after that, unrelated, and doctors said that unmasked a disease in the making, almost akin to professional football players who are predisposed to have dementia. And then I had the brain scan, the SPECT scan, and the clinical tests that confirmed the diagnosis, and I also carry one of the Alzheimer's genes, APOE4. And at that point, Rich, I said, you know, I could get into a pity party and shake my fist at God, both of which I did. I was raised Irish Catholic, have a strong faith. Or I could go back to my muscle memory, and I'm Irish Catholic, and you know, the Irish never get mad, they get even, and I'm getting even with Alzheimer's and telling the story.
You mentioned your grandfather and your mother. Is it uncommon that Alzheimer's is hereditary, that there's a gene that's attached to this?
It happens often, but more often than not, it is not hereditary, which is the scary part of the disease. You asked before about the impact on a generation. The estimate right now is in 7 years, Alzheimer's will outpace cancer and heart disease by 7-fold.
Wow.
It will bankrupt Medicare. It is the crisis has already started, and people don't want to talk about it because the word is dementia, and it has a Latin root or a word picture of a demon screaming or howling in the desert. And you know, at the end of the day, Rich, you can't remove a brain. I also have prostate cancer, and I'm not treating it because that's my exit strategy. I don't want I saw my mother and I saw my grandfather, and I know there's no cure right now, and I don't want my family and my children to see me at that state in a nursing home.
I'm curious, you spent the better part of your adult life in Is that your salvation, or in some ways does that make it even harder when you're looking for the word and you're having trouble finding it, or you're trying to place the memory and you can't locate it? Does it make it harder? Or I know you have an office, which is, which helps you, remember things and place things. But is it also a curse?
It's a mixed blessing. My training in journalism has taught me how to fight this, because you keep asking questions. When I was a young reporter out in Arizona covering organized crime and the mafia and the courts, I befriended a Maricopa County Superior Court justice who taught me court reporting. And she kept saying, keep asking questions, Greg, until you get the answers. And I followed her out to the Arizona Court of Appeals. It was Sandra Day O'Connor. And she taught me court reporting, and her husband died of Alzheimer's. Yep. And so you have the instinct to keep asking questions, but you have to have strategies. And my strategies, God bless my Mac. You'll never see me without my MacBook Pro or my iPhone. And when I'm writing or I'm trying to figure something out, I'm Googling, what's the word for this? What's the word for that? And early on, when I started the disease, the rage was taking over. And and I talked to counselors, I talked to priests, and they said, let go and let God. And there were times I would, which I still do, I pick up a phone, and I don't remember how to dial, and I throw it against hurl it from the family room to the kitchen and bang it off the wall. And what I try to say in my book is that Alzheimer's is like a loose plug in a socket. Over time, it's so loose the plug falls out. We've all seen it. Push it back in, falls out again. Pretty soon the plug is so loose that it won't go back in and the lights go dark. And Alzheimer's is a death in slow motion. It's like having a sliver of your brain shaved every day. The stereotype of Alzheimer's is just the end stage. And that's what the public looks at and says, well, they're 85 years old, they're in a nursing home. They're going to die anyway. Anyone who doesn't think you're going to die someday out there, please raise your right hand. Mm-hmm. But Alzheimer's is affecting younger people. It's not your grandfather's disease. People in their 50s who are still working, people in their 60s, in the early and mid stage. 60% of my short-term memory is gone in 60 seconds. Don't recognize, including my own wife at times. All the time in familiar places, don't know where I am, seeing things that aren't there. Just horrific symptoms, but in the early stage, I'm able to hold on, which gets back to your question, roundabout way of answering. And you're very nice not to interrupt me, because I told you to when I ramble. But getting back to that full circle where you know what's going on, and you sit back in faith. And my doctor a long time ago told me, you got to learn to dance with Alzheimer's. You can't beat it up. You got to dance with it.
You mentioned in your early days in journalism, your experience with Sandra Day O'Connor, obviously eventual Supreme Court Justice. Coincidentally, we're in an event where we got to spend some time with Sandra Day O'Connor not long ago.
She's a wonderful woman.
She herself, her family is going through a very painful experience with Alzheimer's, where her husband totally lost complete memory of her.
Right. And
she had to institutionalize him where he met someone else. And has no memory of their life together, but is having a new life with someone else.
Right.
And from the people I know that have had Alzheimer's in the family, it's not just the person suffering, but the family surrounding them lives through it too, with all the uncertainties, and they see the chipping away. How much of a worry is that for you, not just what you have to go through, but your family?
Well, that's Rich. That's a huge worry. The caregivers of the world are the real heroes here. There's going to come a time, and I know, and I watched my mother on a similar track as my mother. She fought it, and we both deal off a cognitive reserve, a blessing of intellect from God, but at some point the reserve tank is dry. Yep. And that in short years to come will happen, whereas other things, fall to the wayside, as they have right now with me. But you know, in the fight, and I got to tell you, the plug just fell out. I forgot your question.
Well, it's the families.
The families, thank you. And I told you that would happen. The caregivers are heroes. They're the ones, like I just forgot a minute ago, they don't forget. They live with this. They see the progression. It's horrifying to them. And it's like a slow motion movie in front of their eyes. And they have to deal with the depression. They have to deal with the stress. At the end of the day, many of the caregivers, because they're so run down, they get sick. They go into deeper depression. This country, this world, and it's the reason I wrote this book, and it wasn't easy to strip myself naked, but damn it, I probably can't say that. You could edit that out. I can? All right. Yeah. We got to recognize what this demon is and stand against it. And because you know, this book is not about me. It's probably too late for me. I get that. It's about you and your children, my children, your grandchildren, my grandchildren, and the children and grandchildren of everyone who's watching you right now.
Up next, much more of my conversation with Greg about his battle with this devastating disease and also how he came up with the title on Pluto.